Hello, teachers and students. My name is Sarah Clavon. I teach AP Literature and Composition, as well as Teacher Pathway at Lincoln High School in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Maybe you were with me last time when we introduced some strategies to help you students, you teachers, understand, interpret, and then eventually recite poetry. Last time, we looked at the importance of reading a text multiple times and in varied ways. It is unreasonable to expect that we can read a poem one time and totally get it. We need to read it several times over and over. And then we need to notice. We paid notice last time to the shifts that occur in poetry. Those shifts could be from one stanza to the next, even from one line to the next. So we pay attention to when a poet shifts in tone or mood, when there are shifts in point of view, or even shifts that would signal something greater like a change in characterization. In this video, we move to contrasts. When we take time to notice a poet's use of contrasts or contrasting language and structure, that can help us understand the poem at a deeper level. So when I say contrast, I'm thinking about language contrast, like juxtaposition, where poets would place two things, two words side by side that don't go together, and that's to draw our attention to them. But those could also be contrasting ideas or contrasting images. So those contrasts suggest to us that there is something more in that line, something we'd want to write and think about before we get to reciting a poem. This work, looking at contrasts, help us to move from the literal to the metaphorical. Last week, we really focused on the shifts being a way to articulate what's happening in that poem, to get to the gist of it by looking at a literal interpretation. Today, looking at contrasts asks us to look at language specifically and can help us move to a metaphorical level. So today we might ask ourselves, where are there contrasting words, phrases, ideas, and images? And then, what is the effect of those contrasts? Let's continue our practice with the poem Christmas 1970 by Sandra Castillo. This poem and a host of other great poems and poets can be found at the Poetry Out Loud site. Let's take another look at the first two stanzas of Christmas 1970 by Sandra Castillo. Where do you see some contrasts? Maybe contrasting language or images or ideas. I see an example of contrast in the first line. This silver tree. I wouldn't normally think of trees as silver necessarily. We have something that is an element that's we might associate with richness, with royalty, but even something made by mankind or sculpted and crafted by mankind next to tree, something natural. So I wouldn't put those two words together necessarily. And it's interesting that it starts this way, a silver tree, something unnatural perhaps. Do you see another example? Along that same line, I see the same sort of juxtaposition that follows later, metallic roots. Again, we have a description of something man-made next to something natural, those metallic roots. What about here? An unwanted door prize. Who doesn't want a door prize? So this is an example of something that seems unexpected to me. An unwanted door prize. That might be something that we would write about or emphasize in reciting this poem. What about in the second stanza? Poets often use color to signal some sort of connotation, some association. For example, sometimes the word white signals an element of innocence or rebirth. So it's interesting to me that Castillo's poem includes this white dress and black boots, perhaps there's an idea of innocence that's reinforced by this 8-year-old speaker looking back at this specific time when she was 8 years old. So looking at that contrasting language can help us understand something unnatural, something even unwanted, a gift unwanted, and then some element of innocence. Let's keep going. The last stanza of this poem contains some contrasting language as well. You know, I always tell my students that in poetry, those first and last lines are often crucial to our understanding. So taking a closer look at the last lines of this poem, I can see even a map cannot show you the way back to a place. That's unexpected. We expect a map to be able to show us the way. We look to a map for guidance to know where we are and where we're going. So it's interesting that Castillo uses that, a map that cannot show us the way back. So now we have contrasting time periods as well, the way back to a place that no longer exists. Maybe this goes along with our shifts in time period too, huh? So looking at contrast can give us some new understanding and new ideas about what the poet intends for his or her message. And when we look at those contrasts, we're moving to the metaphorical level that can help us understand message and purpose and intent and help us interpret the poem. When we identify those contrasts and notice them, then it's time for us to ask ourselves these questions. What is the effect of placing two unlike things together? And is there some irony that the poet reveals through contrast? If you're working with Castillo's poem on your own, now might be the time that you do some writing or thinking about contrasts, what you noticed, and getting to these questions. If you're working with a poem of your own choosing, and I hope you are, then try to apply this same thinking and questioning and strategy to the poem that you've chosen. Read through it several times, identify shifts, notice those, get the gist of the poem, and then look at contrasts. How does the poet use contrasting language, images, and ideas, and what's the effect? Good luck and keep reading poetry.